Next, though, Saudi Arabia is sending additional troops to its eastern region of Qatif for the government fearing riots. Public anger is rising in the area, with reports of more marches planned in support of two local activists that were killed in a rally on Sunday. The demonstration was in response to the violent arrest of a prominent Shia cleric. The deaths brought tens of thousands out onto the streets of the city of Qatif for marches that have continued throughout the week. Discontent's fuelled by lack of political and civil freedoms and ongoing detentions of dissidents. That clampdown's been ignored, though, by the West largely, which unconditionally supports the regime. Let's speak to Dan Glazebrook. He's a political analyst from the UK. He's joining us on the line live now to get some thoughts about it. Hi, Dan. Why the need for the army to be deployed in a place where, what we've seen so far at least, were unarmed protests?
Well, everything I think that happens at this point in the whole region, actually, in the Middle East, particularly in places like Saudi Arabia, has to be understood in the context of preparation for war against Iran. What they're trying to do is secure the regional environment for facilitating a war against Iran with minimal repercussions for Western interests in the region. So what this means is not only knocking out states that are allied with Iran, such as Syria, or if they can't knock them out and take out the regime, then destabilizing them, putting them out of the picture that way as far as possible, doing that to states that are allied with Iran, but also in terms of kind of repressing and keeping down and disempowering the Shia population. Because until Iran gets its own nuclear weapon, and Godspeed that day, frankly, because that's the only real deterrent that would stop this next round of warmongering that they're planning. Until that day, the real deterrent against an attack on Iran is the great fear that the Shia populations, especially across the region, will rise up, will attack Western and Zionist interests in the region. So this is the real deterrent. This is actually what's been holding them back. They tried to crush Hezbollah in 2006 through Israel, and that failed. They're trying to crush Syria at the moment, and now we see in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia attacks on the on the Shia population there. So this is why the army's been sent in my view. This is trying to prevent the Shia from being in any position to weaken the Shia, to prevent them being in a position to respond effectively in solidarity with Iran in the event of an attack on that country.
So, it's a complicated picture here. How does this tie in then with the Saudi government accusing Iran of being behind the arrest, of the unrest, rather?
Yeah, well, for Saudi Arabia, Iran's behind everything they don't like. You know, this is, these days, Syria and Iran, you know, you hear what the Saudis are saying about these countries. Frankly, you don't know whether you're listening to Hillary Clinton, Prince Saud, or reading an IDF press release. They're all singing from the same song sheet. And what's interesting as well is that Saudi Arabia has really dropped any pretense of being an anti-Zionist kind of regime. Any kind of words or action against Israel is just dead now. They're promoting this idea that Iran is the number one enemy. Iran's the cause of all the problems in the Middle East, which is ridiculous in the last 10 years, especially when you've had US-British occupation that's destroyed Iraq, cost 1 million lives. You know, you've got this destabilization process in Syria, in Libya. Libya's left in a mess with racist lynch mobs running around, marauding, attacking the place, and then say, oh, Iran is the cause of all our problems. Iran is actually the last strong regional independent power in the Middle East. And Saudi Arabia is, of course, just trying to shift the blame. It's doing the bidding of its imperialist masters in the US and Britain, frankly.
Of course, on the face of it, the US is Saudi Arabia's top ally, but America is also the self-proclaimed global crusader of democracy. How does all that add up?
Well, it adds up, really. I mean, in the picture that I've shown, there's no love of democracy. We've seen that all over the Middle East. Frankly, it's only a few totally deluded people in the West, really, that believe Western foreign policy in the Middle East has anything to do with supporting democracy. Saudi Arabia is a monarchical dictatorship. Bahrain's a monarchical dictatorship. If you look at what's happening in Syria, even the Syrian peaceful opposition themselves, who started the peaceful protest movement, groups like the National Coordination Committee, themselves are saying, look, we don't support the Free Syrian Army, we don't support the Syrian opposition in exile, the Syrian National Council. They've withdrawn any support they might have had for these groups, because even they see that these are actually just tools of foreign powers trying to subvert, destabilize and take over Syria. So even the Syrian opposition don't actually support what the West is supporting, even in Syria, under the guise of democracy. So it's not about democracy, it's about divide and rule. You know, remember the Saudi Arabians it's a regime created essentially by the British state.
All right.
And why was it created? Why were the Sauds put in power? Because of their sectarian attitude within the Islamic community. They would much prefer Sunni and Shias divided than united against them. And especially since the united opposition against the occupation of Iraq, they've tried to sow discontent there. They're trying to sow it elsewhere as well.
Dan, we could talk
really
about this all night. I'm
picture.
afraid time's against us. So is on news channels, isn't it?
Okay.
Dan Glazebrook, independent political analyst from the UK. Thanks for your thoughts.